There we go. All right, good, good. Good morning, good morning. Welcome everybody to the Saturday Morning Mastermind. I'm your host, Samantha Studebaker Carl, and I'm here with my good friends Catherine and Karen and Dan. And today we're continuing our conversation about the book Leonardo and Gabriel by Tim Tigner. And we're talking about the chapter titled Arguments. But before we get going with that, first of all, I just wanted to I want everybody to be able to introduce themselves, but I also just wanted to address anybody who's watching, and we're just sending all of our love out to everyone and our prayers in the midst of this the COVID-19 virus outbreak, and everybody we're very we have much love going out to everyone who's affected by this, and I just wanted to say that real quick before we move on. And um, okay, guys, jump out and introduce yourselves.
Hello, this is Catherine in Boulder, Colorado for a couple more days.
This is Karen Lohoff from the from the Valley of the Sun, from the Phoenix area. By the way, when I got on my computer this morning, a little news piece said that Kenny Rogers had died, apparently in the night, peacefully, at 81. And my big amazement about that is that he was 81. Of course, that follows that my amazement how old I am. So anyway.
Dan Sisek in Las Vegas, Nevada, where you wouldn't believe it, but the Strip is like a ghost town here because everybody's gone back to where they're going because of COVID-19. And but yeah, once again, just sending out our love and prayers to everybody. And if you want to have a place where you can kind of get away from it all, come join us and join in on the topic and not think about that type of stuff for a little while, and we can think of other things. So look forward to seeing you guys come on and jump and join us.
Yeah, I am so thankful that we have this platform that we can still get together with one another, and then that just technology is where it is today that makes it possible for people to still get the supplies that they need and be mostly isolated from one another in the midst of this virus outbreak. And we're just it's an interesting time in many ways to see how the world is addressing this um, and how people are dealing with it. And so yeah, but so anyway, guys, so we're talking about the arguments chapter, and in the last chapter that was titled Revelation, Gabriel had revealed to Leonardo that the the insight that he's saying that God hides in plain sight, camouflage like a king in a monk's garb. It does this by wearing another name, and he says, "You know God as time," and um, and so that's the revelation. All this the time that we've been studying this book up until now. Um, Gabriel and Leonardo have had this discussion of all the different attributes and characteristics of what God is, and now Gabriel's saying, now that we've taken all of these things, and this is what it adds up to, is that God is time. And so at the end of the chapter, that revelation, um, it was something where I'm like, I don't see it. I completely disagree with it. That's my personal opinion on the situation, and or on this topic, is I don't agree with what he's saying here. And my thought process on that is that time is not a thing; it's a unit of measurement, and it measures our movement through space. And it's how we relate to one another in different parts of the world. It's how we determine um, you know, our the way that the world moves around the sun, so that we all can coordinate with one another, and we understand whereabouts things are going to happen in terms of when the sun's going to come up and when it's going to go down, and that's how we've determined this. It's something that we call this movement time, and so that's where I struggle with the idea that that God is time, because that would mean that God is simply the name of movement through space, and that's what I'm thinking anyway. What do you guys think?
I think it's a more complex aspect of that. Because I'm trying to look at it from. I, I don't think that. I don't think the essence of God is defined by time. I think He can come in and out of time and impact our lives and stuff through that. And I agree to a point that it is a measurement of a period, or that. But I also look at my own body, because I start out as a baby, and then I grow, and so I'm not in that same exact moment as a baby. So I still think there's an essence of time there. I think it's probably the most simplest way for us to understand it, and put it in our heads to understand the aspect. Because I don't believe that, as the sun goes around the earth, there, there's that movement. So, and when we come back around to that next same point, here we circle around and we come back, things and aspects and conditions and everything of life have changed. So to me, I think I think we don't fully understand every aspect of it and how it impacts us, but I still think it's an aspect of, because I also believe that He came and was, the incarnate, and lived in time too. So I think He's beyond that definition of the constraints of what we have in time. But I think that for our brains, it's, probably the best way for us to understand it and reconcile it, so we can function and move, or it's the way He created us in, to be able to function and move in that aspect, to relate and correlate and move. Because I don't think without it we'd have no reference, and if there wasn't, I don't think we would. I don't see how we could have our physiological changes without it either.
Well, I don't think God has anything to do with time myself. I don't think it really exists, except in our own little minds, and like you said, how we kind of use it as a tool to keep track of stuff. But I've been trying to, think of it in a larger way or something, because it kind of boggles my mind that this concept was ever brought up. So he had to have a good reason to bring it up. So I've been trying to expand my mind to figure out what the reason was, and I haven't been able to do that enough. Um, time is non-existent in other dimensions, as far as I know. So yeah, I'm kind of like right there with you, Samantha. I'm in total opposition of this theory here.
Yeah, that was my initial first reaction as soon as I read that sentence at the end of that chapter, was that time does not exist. And unless thought process is to suggest that God does not exist. I was like, wait a second, that doesn't even make sense. And because time is, it's no different than the name. It's a name of something that happens. And it's not even really a thing that happens. Stuff happens regardless of whether we call it time. And time is different no matter where you are. I mean, it's different from where I am to where you are. It's different from where you are to where Karen and Dan are. I mean, it's right now my time is 10:36. It's not that for you guys. It's completely different. And even if your clock says, say, 7:37 when mine just turned 10:37, this moment of me speaking is before you even hear me. There's a distance in between us, that even there's that delay, and then even as I am speaking and it's coming to you and it's hitting your ears, and it goes into your ears and it's processed by your brain, and then your brain computes it, and then you have a thought, and there's all of these things that happen it seems like it happens instantaneously, but it doesn't. There's a movement between. And so, my thought on that is that, this thing that we call time is not, it's not really, it's just this movement between. I ended up looking up because I was like, I just really got to wrap my head around what the scientist says that time is, what is the scientific definition of time? And I came across this article that's called the physicist's ideas of time will blow your mind. This is what the article is entitled. And I just want to read some of this. It says, from our perspective, the perspective of creatures who make up a small part of the world, we see that the world is flowing in time, the physicist writes. At the quantum level, however, durations are so short they can't be divided, and there is no such thing as time. In fact, Ravelli, this is the physicist, in fact, Ravelli explains there are actually no things at all. Instead, the universe is made up of countless events. Even what might seem like a thing, a stone, say, is really an event taking place at a rate that we can't register. The stone is in a continual state of transformation, and on a long enough timeline, even it is fleeting, destined to take on some other form. In the elementary grammar of the world, there is neither space nor time, only processes that transform physical qualities from one form to another, from which it is possible to calculate possibilities and relations. And this article, it goes on, and what it ends with, it goes on a lot about that. Let me get down here. It says, basically, he believes time is a story we're always telling ourselves in the present tense, individually and together. It's a collective act of introspective and narrative record keeping and expectation that's based on our relationship to prior events and the sense that happenings are impending. It is the tale that we get that gives us our sense of self, as well as a feeling that many neuroscientists, mystics, and physics argue in a mass delusion. Let me reread that. It says, it is a tale that gives us our sense of self, as well as a feeling that many neuroscientists, mystics, argue is a mass delusion. Without a record or memory and expectations of continuation, we would not experience time's passage or even know who we are. Time, then, is an emotional and psychological experience. It's loosely connected with eternal reality, he says, but mostly something that happens now in our head. So it's mostly something that is happening now in our head. And I really thought on that for a while, because, I mean, if we did not have memory, we would not experience time. And because we would not have any knowledge of the past, and we would not have any anticipation for the future if we had no memory. We would just simply be right here and right now, and we would. I don't even know if we could exist without that, without memory. I mean, I'm sure that. Well, I don't even know that I don't know if there's literally no memory, no future, no past, and it's just you're just right here, uh, which they're saying isn't even really possible because all molecules are constantly in movement, constantly changing. Like the rock is eventually going to be changing into something else. It looks solid, but it really isn't at the molecular level. Um, it really makes you think. So um, then it makes me wonder if maybe he's trying to get at, instead of, I mean, he's saying time because maybe that's a word that we're all familiar with, but in my thought is that maybe he's just saying that God is what encompasses everything, or is the capability for everything to exist because of this theory of time, or because we experience this movement and we remember it and we can anticipate it. Therefore, maybe that's what he means.
I think I can agree with you a little bit on that. That that's kind of that's what gives us, that's the force or power, or as I call him, God. That gives us that ability to experience and relate and understand, so we can, for lack of a better word, I think, to be alive as we think it. Like you said, because if that's true, that if we didn't have the memories and everything and all that, then we'd just be kind of, we wouldn't be able to put any comprehension to each moment that we're in, then really into, because this moment would be that moment, but we wouldn't remember it. So it'd be like, just, we wouldn't have anything relevant to compare it to. And then I think that's why we say we're alive, because of the fact that we have the memories, we have the feelings, we have the all. And I think that just is another fear of, that's why I don't think everything just happened by chance, you know, because if it happened by chance, how would how would all the molecules and everything know which way to form in order to be able to create the things they create, or create the cosmos, create this universe, create the stars, create the planets? I think there's got to be something out there ordering that all together. So I think that's how this all kind of is glued together: is infinite intelligence, the force of the universe, God, however you want to call it. But and I think in order to be able to, I don't even know, and I don't even know why we were given the ability to have memories, to understand, or do that. That is another whole another question. Why did that come about? It leads into a whole nother area too. And so that's, um yeah, this is mind-boggling, and it kind of hurts the brain a little bit too to think about it, because you really go off in all different directions, because you're like, okay, well, if this, and it's hard to come to me. It's hard to come to that one concluding real fact of why and how and what. So I'm still kind of, you know, but I follow some of what you're saying.
I was reminded when you were talking a moment ago. I don't know what caused me to remember it, but we had talked. at some point previously about like the veil between knowing and the human existence, and it reminded me of another part in this article that that they were writing about. And it says, the world seems ordered, going from past to present, linking cause and effect because of our perspective. We superimpose order upon it, fixing events into a particular linear series. We link events to outcomes, and this gives us a sense of time. But the universe is much more complex and chaotic than we can allow for, according to Ravelli. Humans rely on approximate descriptions that actually ignore most of the other events, relations, and possibilities. Our limitations create a false or incomplete sense of order that doesn't tell the whole story. The physicist argues that, in fact, we blur the world to focus on it. We blind ourselves to see, and for that reason, time is ignorance. And and that, of course, when I read that, that reminded me of this veil that we spoke of. And of course, he's referring to the fact that we can't see all of the processes that are actually happening in the universe outside of our senses. For instance, when he was sitting there talking about the rock and the fact that the rock is really not what it seems. We think it's this solid object when in fact it's made up of billions of little molecules that are constantly moving in a similar fashion to the way that we on this little planet Earth are moving through the space in the universe. Is that, there's as many things going on inside this rock as there are in relation to the way that we are moving through the universe as the little Earth that we are. And so that aspect of blinding ourselves to see, it brings that back around, and it's just an interesting concept to think that, okay, we've narrowed our vision as a intelligent entity, if you will. I don't know, and put ourselves in these little human bodies so that we can see from a perspective we would not be able to see if we saw everything. If we, that's my thought. Anyway, somebody else say something.
Well, now you made me think of something else we've talked about in other books and other things about talking about that opening of the third eye type thing, stuff, and maybe that's where some of that comes into play, is being more awakened to, like say the whole stream of beyond what we just see here, where some people talk about.
Hey. Hey, can you guys hear me? I can't hear anything.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me?
Oh, now I can, yeah.
Okay, I was muted. Okay,
Yeah.
Catherine, you said you hear both of us. Okay. I can't hear Dan. Dan's frozen. Karen's frozen. Catherine, can you unmute and let me see if I can hear you?
Hey, Catherine. Hey, Karen.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you.
Okay, so kind of to go back over, I know I said something about, going back to past episodes and things we talked about, um, the third eye and stuff. And so, some people being able to utilize or access the third eye or whatever, have a better, more open thought process to a lot of things compared to a lot of people that are more confined to how we think and what we look and how we see things and stuff like that. And so when you were reading that last little bit, that kind of made me feel like, oh, okay, that might be where more the enlightenment comes from when people tap into that third eye in relation to time and relevance and how things um, react together based on what you talk about, whereas time really is not, it's just a measure of movement. It's not really anything that really exists except for our brains to be able to construct and put things together because of the fact that we have memories, because we remember something from this moment right here, and we're now in the new next little moment. But if we have memories, we wouldn't remember that, and so there would be no real correlation to time having passed. So um, I don't know if Samantha's going to be right back. That was what I was leading into based off what she was reading from that one guy.
She put that BRB, so she's going to be right back. But you're talking about people being more open to different things, like being open possibly to understanding the third eye or utilizing the third eye. And we had talked just before about the veil. And I think that some people experience a thinning of the veil, or they concentrate on developing an ability to have less of the veil influence their lives, that they can have experiences that come to them from the other side that some of the rest of us don't have. I think that comparing things to the rock is really quite interesting, because I've often thought about rocks and how they seem to not have anything much alive. When we think about everything's alive, and I think about rocks, I think they seem least alive of many things that I think about. And yet, here in this article, they're talking about how the molecules in them are changing, at a speed that we can't know what it is. And if we think about how quickly our bodies can change, ourselves can change, and that's all involved in time. I think that that's pretty amazing to think about. Those are my thoughts for the moment.
I'm glad you brought up the concept of alive, because it seems like he addresses that in this chapter. He's talking about, because Gabriel goes, let's see, where does he say it? He says something about, he starts out by saying time is not animate, and because that's kind of his first reaction to Gabriel's revelation that God is time. And he's like, time is not animate. And then Gabriel's like, what, you want to add animate to our list now? And then, but then they start talking about, he says, perhaps the assumption is the primary problem, the blind spot that prevents everyone from seeing the truth. And he says, are you implying that God is not animate? And then Gabriel's like, well, what does animate mean? And then he says alive. And he's like, well, what does alive mean without without being a revolving conversation. Like, do you mean God is not dead? It's like, what's your definition of alive? And but I like how you, Karen, referred to the rock as alive, and in the sense of at the molecular level, if we're talking about it, we come back around to this movement through the universe, and everything is moving in some way. It's constantly changing from one form to another, even things that are as solidly physically solid as a rock, or even things that are even more solid than a rock. Like, I don't know, what is this? One of the more solid metal or solid, what are the elements, if you will? Is lead or titanium? I don't know what those things that's even more solid than a rock, more dense, I guess you could say. Dan says, I believe the whole world is alive, but not in the same way we perceive it. And and I think that's a thing to think about too. Is it was funny because they kind of go all along a little bit back and forth on this whole concept of what alive means, and again, it really comes back down to our perspective on what that means. Similarly to the way what we mean by time, is it a matter of perspective? So that was just a thought that came up when you mentioned alive, Karen.
Well, that was.
I was starting to say
it. You want to go ahead, Dan? I was noticing at the beginning of that chapter that was the first thing that he brought up, and that was definitely my first disgruntlement, I guess, with him saying it's time. To suggest that God is time, something that doesn't care if I lose someone to, coronavirus or to age or to anything. I see time not having a care about, what's going on with me, whereas I have in my life always seen God as, at least someone I could plead over to my side and speak with. How do you speak with time? And so this whole part of the argument where he's going in circles about, well, so how do you explain this without the circular argument to it? And Leonardo starts to feel like he was one of Socrates' students, where these questions came at him just to kind of show his ignorance. And that would certainly be easy in my case. There's many questions that have come up in this whole part of the book that have really made me feel like I just don't get it. I haven't gotten it. I haven't understood. And I will confess to the fact that letting it arise in the last few years, that I see it as brainwashed to the beliefs that I had, as we all are. There isn't somebody that hasn't impacted our belief system with things that we find are not true. I have to think, sometimes when I take things for granted, I have to think, where did I get that? Is this something I really believe is the way that I'm thinking? Or did I take this from believing that, for example, particular scriptures were true? because there's always been the argument about the scriptures and about the books that were left out, and the that conference back in the middle of time. I don't know what that was called. Anyway, here's the end of my thoughts for now.
Real quick, guys, we're past the top of the hour. I just wanted to address that. However, I'm not on a schedule, so if nobody else is, we can keep going, or if you want to wrap it up, we can. It's up to everybody. I know, Jason, you just got on, so just let me know one way or another if you're ready to jump off, and we can wrap it up whenever.
Yeah, I could hang out for a few more. Sure. Find it it's a pretty interesting conversation, regarding time and all that, and life, living. So
I can hang.
that was interesting about the example you were talking about
Yeah.
earlier. You need to restart the recording, or you're good, Samantha?
Nope, we're going. We're still recording right now.
Yeah. So, like, if rocks
Yeah,
are
it's still going.
as close to not living as possible, then and we're like on Earth, and if it's not alive, then it's almost as if you think of the grand scheme of things. I was thinking the universe being so vast and having so many things happening within the universe. I think, like one of you mentioned, it's almost as if when you look down to the molecular level of, I think, what you guys were discussing with rocks and how things were moving and changing, it's as if, well, what if there was a possibility that something could live, like, say, on a electron, or on some piece of a an atom, at the molecular level, if maybe a, not just something, but maybe a whole civilization at that microscopic level within that own relevant time for the universe. But because there is that action going on at that level, but who's to say that there can't be life? Maybe not as we know it, but then again, like you're saying, how do you define living? So I think I just entered that loop you were talking about.
Yeah,
Circular reference.
I've thought about that a lot. I mean, we have no idea how far, we're only able to see from this perspective so far down, size wise, and we're only able to see so far out distance wise. And yeah, I mean, it could be completely circular in all ways, it could go on infinitely smaller, it could go on infinitely bigger. We have no way of knowing. And we can only see as far as we can see, and I think that's part of it is, and as humans we can only see what we're capable of seeing, even though we know that there are sounds we can't hear and light that we can't see, and there's smallness that we can't see with our eyes. We need other instruments that are not human in order to see beyond our own individual capabilities, and we don't even know what we don't know, and we don't know what we can't see either. There's so much that's possible that we can't even see, that who knows, like you said, Jason, and like Karen, she mentioned the Whoville as just kind of like a silly, but I mean, who's to say that isn't completely possible, that we are inside of an enormous world that's even bigger than we even can fathom, to the point where we are just like a little molecule floating around inside someone else's rock. I mean, we don't know. I like that you brought that up.
It reminded me of a class that I took at university where we went and sat outside. We were taken out into a canyon, and we sat outside beside a stream. We each kind of did this social distancing kind of thing, and we spent, I don't know, maybe the whole class there. We were supposed to observe what we could. We weren't really given a lot of instructions about it. We were just supposed to kind of, notice things and come up with new ideas. And as I sat there, I noticed the ants on the little grass pieces by the water, and I thought about how, I was only looking at a few ants, but they had entire colonies probably spread along that stream bank, and how little they were, and how I didn't know any of their names, and I didn't have any idea of their families. I didn't know if they had mothers and fathers. I didn't know how they bore their children. There was just so much I didn't know about the simple things of ants, and it has stayed with me 40 years, of just enjoying that view of a different life right here on this same planet.
Go ahead, Dan. I know you've tried to pop out a couple times. Jump out there.
My timing is horrible with you guys. No, it's just interesting how far expanded we could go, or how because and I was going back when I was referencing a little bit earlier when I was talking in chat. And he talks about being alive, not dead, and maybe for us the passage of time a little bit is part where that's how we see it as being alive. So what is the definition really of being alive? Because like you said, rocks, and like I said it earlier, I believe that the whole earth is alive. I believe in a sense the universe is alive because they say it's growing, expanding. It's it does change. I can look out. I'm thinking of some mountains around here where, aside from grading that they've done for houses that they build, but I've also seen some natural changes from where they were more squared off and stuff to where over time with erosion and the wind blowing and stuff, and seasons, rain and stuff, where they've changed and they're not the same. So yes, they have changed. So that molecular structure changed because it's broken down and changed into gravel or sand or dust or whatever, which is a different, So I think it's interesting how we can really go on probably forever trying to extract and comprehend all these aspects, but I still think once again that there's so much of our brain potential and what we don't know and don't understand that we haven't unlocked in our brains, that could maybe help us understand some of these other aspects in a greater potential way and have a better understanding that it's worth continuing to look into and diving into and exploring and trying to expand so we can grow on that and also maybe have better understandings of what it is to be me as a, I don't want to say person, but as a organic living. Yeah, you get what I'm saying in that sense.
Yeah, Jason, I saw that you had posted in the chat a comment of alive as in living conscious, feeling being capable of death. Um, as a living conscious feeling being capable of death. Sorry, the way I read it. Yeah, and then part of this chapter, because they're still arguing this concept of alive, if you will. And Gabriel continued, if you try to define alive without creating a circular reference, and you bear in mind that plants, for example, are alive, you'll likely end up with something like still in existence, force, or operation. And he says, does that sound accurate to you? And of course, Leonardo says it does. And then he says, Gabriel says, good. Now tell me this: does that definition apply to time? And they go on and they say, yes, time does indeed fit that definition of animate. Time's existence, force, and operation are all evidenced by our every action. By this very discussion, this is so weird. But what I was going to say on that whole aspect of still in existence, force, or operation being a definition of time, again, it brings me back to the thought process of time not existing, because time is simply a label or name of this movement in the universe, or our ability to remember the past and guesstimate the future, or expect a series of events to that the whole aspect of it just being in our heads. And so then I feel like in this chapter, it just is, Gabriel is trying to make these points of why he thinks time, or why he says that time is God and God is time, and yet all these arguments to me don't make any sense in that if we look at time in terms of just what is the definition of time, and time being a unit of measurement. So I find this chapter very interesting, and yet I don't feel like the concept holds water. So unless he's meaning something completely different by the definition, or by the word time,
Yeah, so it must be the passage of time, right? I mean, is what I'm thinking. The passage of time, because time is just our label.
mm-hmm.
In a different world somewhere, they might call it something else.
Right. Who is it?
They might stay awake for 3 days and then sleep for 20 minutes, and it might be, their days and nights, and depending on how they evolved or whatever, whatever their perspective is. What our perspective is just based on our, how the passage of time, the passage of existence, so maybe it's the passage of time that they're meaning, where, it doesn't, it just continues to go on as far as we know, and unless it then folds back in on itself and then, creates itself again or something. Who knows? But yeah, that's interesting, because it sort of lends you to think that you shouldn't be in this circular, this circular conversation, but then it sort of puts you right back into one. But I think maybe, like you're saying, it's sort of like using the same word to define that word, time. Yeah.
Right. Use the word to define the word. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Kind of like when he's saying, when they're saying, well, alive is what, not dead, and not dead, and dead is not alive, or alive is not. Yeah, it's just a word to define a word. It's a concept that we think we know, but yet do we really even know? But Karen, you mentioned.
Well, that's interesting, because like sometimes they talk about they, meaning like shows and whatnot, you might put a character in a position where the character can't die. He's just, maybe that's his punishment. He can never die. Exists forever, and in the state that he's in, is that thing alive because it can't ever die? Or is it not alive because it can't die? Or does being able to die have any, even a characteristic of being alive? I don't. Sorry, I didn't. I just had to get
Fine. No, that's fine. Yeah. Or, our definition of death is, I mean, I think that we kind of look at one another and we say, well, if I can't communicate with you anymore, you're not if you're not on the same level of existence, I guess that could be part of it. If we're incapable of communicating with one another because we're in different dimensions, then one of us is not alive. I had no idea. But Karen, you mentioned earlier where your thought, I think it was you that said something about the thought process of thinking of time as not caring. Time doesn't care about us. It just keeps on going, whether we go along or not or whatever. And so then, yeah, it comes back around to that too. It's like this thing that exists whether we do or not. And but it doesn't even exist if we're just saying it's a process. According to what that article I was reading, and the physicist was suggesting that everything is a series of events or processes that are happening, and we label that time because we inside of this frame of reference is we have memories and we have the ability to potentially guess what will happen next because of what has happened in the past. And so yeah, it kind of yeah that's where I'm at with this chapter. It just makes me question all of those different things, like what is he really referring to. Yeah, so I don't know, there's more in this chapter.
Round and round in circles.
Yes, exactly, because then he goes on and he's talking about animate, time. First he says, according to the still in existence force in operation, and that time does fit that definition, according to this book and this chapter. This is what they're suggesting. And but then he says, alternatively, you might define animate as marked by alertness, energy, animation, or activity. And he says it was closer to what he initially had in mind. Yes, that sounds better. It feels right, too. And then Gabriel goes, then answer me this. How would you know whether any of those defining characteristics was exhibited by an incorporeal entity, as we've repeatedly determined that God must be? And they're like, let's see. How could you observe alertness, energy, animation, and or activity in God, given that it has no physical presence? So that's kind of the next. We can't see that which is incorporeal. So okay, right? So there's that too, right?
So to me, God is the most timeless thing that I know of, and that's because God seems to be ever available to anyone that's in human form. Consciousness does not die. Energy, you can't kill energy. It just changes to something else, and that's what we're made out of. Now, I've been working with crystals my whole life, and rocks are alive. Crystals are alive, and they change. If you look at your crystals closely, you'll see that they change in physical characteristics through the years. Probably most people have not worked with crystals closely enough to notice that. And, but as a human, here in human form, we're taught that healing requires certain, depending on which study, field of study you belong to. Some people will say, well, healing requires, maybe an antibiotic, or healing requires 7 days rest, or healing requires whatever. Just day before yesterday, I had someone ask for a healing, and it literally took 15 seconds. Like, it was so quick, it even blew my mind. But it was, the energy was so palpable. There was no question when I felt the release, and the patient felt the release at the exact same time. I just kind of threw my hands up and said, "There, it's gone," and laughed. And I turned around and looked at him, and he just had this look in his eyes like, "Wow, I felt it. It is gone." Like, we felt it at the exact same moment. To me, that's God, and I don't know how to put a definition on that. But I think that maybe if I have some time, which I'm in the middle of a move, so I probably won't, but maybe somebody has some time. I'm sure that this discussion has been brought up many, many times from different people that have read this book. I'd love to hear some other people's thoughts on why I mean, obviously this is a book of fiction. Why did he choose to define God as time? Because I would say to most of us, God is timeless, if anything. So I do think that it's somewhere in the definition of the word. He's defining it in a different way than we typically are. Personalities. This is something that I've been struggling with since I do talk to dead people. You know, why do personalities? Does each incarnation that we inhabit, does that personality exist forever then? I think it must, because we can go back and talk to what we would refer to as deceased, and they're speaking from the same personality that they had when they were here in human form. And there are mediums that can go back and speak to spirits, you know, 30, 40 years after they've been murdered or something, and get, you know, real clues about what happened to them and who did it to them and this and that. So that makes me feel like each one of our incarnations is a consciousness that exists forever. Now, I believe in reincarnation, so that's kind of a mind flip. Well, what happened, you know, this person, the body's gone, they go, they get whatever lessons they're supposed to get on the other side, then they come back in. But the thing is, I think that that life that they had before continues to exist. Otherwise, how could we then, as mediums, contact that consciousness and get these real facts and figures from them? So, you know, it's very, very interesting. It's, I know certainly as all of this is going on in the country and around the world, not just our country, but I'm definitely getting pulled back to using my, what I call God-given gifts. And people, you know, families are being brought back together, and there's a lot of really good things coming. A lot of the unfair financial practices that are wrought against us, all of that, there's a lot of clearing that's being done right now. It reminds me sort of like a tornado. And if you're not energetically open, a tornado just appears to be, you know, this physical manifestation of the storm. But when you're energetically sensitive, you can really feel the cleansing that tornadoes and storms and different things like that do. It really is an energetic cleansing that happens. And so I think that's kind of what's happening here. Really, you know, we're kind of getting bitch slapped a little bit. And hey, wake up. You guys are headed down the wrong road maybe, or something. You know, we need to pull ourselves together. But as far as, you know, maybe we can do a little research and see, you know, what his definition of this word is. To be quite honest, the most, and this is going to sound silly, but I guess because I've thought about these sorts of things my whole life, it's not a new conversation for me. But what has really become a new conversation for me is just the image of Jesus because of this book. The image of Jesus that all of us have grown to accept that, hey, this is what Jesus looks like. We don't really know. Like, that's just something Michelangelo came up with, right? Is that what this book says?
You brought up so many things, Catherine, that we can talk about. Um, there's on the level of God being timeless, and I think I mentioned in one of our previous chats that thought, the thought of God reminded me, or not the thought of God, but the time issue reminded me of the book that I'd read by Wayne Dyer, where he's talking about getting in the gap, and the gap is that space between thoughts, or the space between heartbeats, if you will. And I've always experienced that if I'm in a meditative state, that time seems to not exist in that state. And I think a lot of times when you are at your most peacefulness, that it in my opinion, it feels like time is not even a part of the equation. It's more like an outside of time experience versus being in time, if you will. So the whole concept of time in this description, yeah, I'm definitely interested in. I'm wondering if he'll explain more as we go into this book, because I haven't read past this chapter, as to why he is saying or using the defining concept of time. But maybe we can find out more just looking on the internet for Tim Tigner and his, maybe something else that he's written somewhere else or whatever. Maybe he's written about this book and why he wrote it. I don't know. But then you were also talking about the tornadoes and being cleansing. And, we used to live on the river years ago, down on White River, and we would get flooding fairly frequently to an extent where we'd either be trapped in our home or just unable to get out from where we were because of the water surrounding the property and whatnot. And I always felt like it was a cleansing. And a lot of people would be so upset about the flood, and it can do some destruction, obviously. I mean, but then at the same time, after it passes through, or even during the time that it was happening, so much life was happening. It was just an amazing thing to watch how it's this tremendous flooding happening, and yet all of this nature is coming alive because of it, and all of the energy that flows because of it. And so I feel like things get stagnant sometimes. We get kind of stuck in this rut of life rut, or worldwide, I don't know, emotional ruts or whatever, and we need these big movements to push us out of them. And maybe that's part of what's going on. It could very well be it's just something that, when I did notice, I know, Catherine, I mentioned to you that I was watching a briefing from the White House yesterday, and so much of what is going on right now with those individuals in the government, where they're actually coming together, working on things together, when otherwise they were fighting with each other over stuff. And they're, the governments are coming together, the state governments and everyone are they're working with one another rather than against one another as much as they were. And that, maybe that's part of this, is it's, in the grand scheme of things, is it's trying to remind us all that we are so much better working together than we are fighting against one another. And and it seems like it happens every time there's some big major catastrophe in the world, is we tend to come back together as a human group, rather than as individual nations or areas, or anyway, that's my thought on that.
I had one of those thoughts that probably I should keep to myself. I don't know how useful it will be, but I have been thinking about, with regards to this group of words that we're kind of calling a chapter, it begins pretty much with Leonardo saying, well, that's not animate. Time's not animate. And my kind of noticed through the whole thing about how Gabriel seems to be trying to disabuse Leonardo and mankind from insisting that God has to be animate. And you were talking about how you and Catherine were talking about how the virus is, well, you were talking about tornadoes actually, and floods, how they seem to be cleansing. And, we can actually look at, in many ways, a virus being cleansing. I mean, it's kind of an uncomfortable thing to do while it's in process, but what you're talking about here with the different peoples coming together, I thought it was interesting that, of course, I had reason to pay attention to this, but the president of Mexico and President Trump had agreed to close the wall for other than, absolutely necessary crossings. And my son, he's not a millennial. He's a little bit older than that, but he kind of tends to think more along the lines of, this doesn't apply to me, nothing to worry about. I can make it across the border. They'll hear me out, all that kind of thing. It's interesting how important it is that we be aware of what we think and how we think, and open to what we think, what we can think from other people. I find that I was talking to someone here. I live in a care home, and he'll be fine. He'll be seeming just fine, and then something will strike him wrong. He will rise up out of his chair and he will slam his hands down and he will swear and he will stalk off about things. And one day, I walk with him, so one day I went to sat beside him and I said, "Have you ever heard what butt hurt is?" Because he's a little bit older than I am, and I think about how long in my life I was ready to be butthurt so easily, and how there's no room for that these days if we're going to get along and make it through some of the things that we need to make it through. The end of my diatribe.
That's a great point, Karen, is just to realize that we all have our own perspectives that we're seeing things from, and we have to allow for each other to have those perspectives as well, and not be butthurt, if you will, from what another person's opinion is, or thoughts, or experiences. So I think that's wonderful. Well, guys, I know we could talk about this concept probably for a while, but we have been on here for quite a while, so we probably ought to be wrapping up. And unless you guys have something else you want to add for today's topic, and we can come back around to it next week. We've only gotten halfway through the chapter of some of the things that were said in here, so we could definitely address more of this next time. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Do we have any idea about what we're going to use next time?
No, that's a good point that you brought that up, because we are coming down to the level chapters. So we want to start thinking about that and maybe come up with some suggestions next time we're on. That would be great. You guys think about it. I'll mention it to Dan too. Cool.
I like that one that you brought up a couple of times. We're still on record. Did you know that? It has to do with, you were meshing it with something that Catherine said the last time, time before last, about, she said something about reading a book about murderers and how reading about their early lives had convinced her that she could forgive any one of them, and it made you think of this book. I think, I guess I can't remember who you were saying brought up the book, but anyway, it sounded like a good book to me.
I'm not sure if it's the same one that Christina had mentioned a while back, the Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, I think. And that one, I just noticed on, I don't know, one of the TV channels that I have, it was saying it was recently made into a movie. And but it's about this lawyer who works in the justice system to I can't remember what the right wording for it, but basically the people who've been treated unjustly in the system, and just seeing their perspectives on their lives and that sort of thing. So that would be definitely an interesting to look at. All right, guys, if nobody has anything else to talk about on this chapter without starting a whole another big discussion, we'll wrap it up for today. So everybody have a great, amazing weekend. And if you're watching this as a recording and you found it an interesting conversation, I encourage you to jump into our Facebook group. You can find us at mindsetmasterycollective.com. That link will take you right into our Facebook group where you can find all the links to our replays, and then you can connect with us if you'd like to participate. So with that, guys, have a great, awesome, amazing weekend, and we'll see you next time on the Saturday Morning Mastermind. Bye for now.